How the New Orleans Saints' recent trade with the Philadelphia Eagles could force the hand of NFC South rivals hungry for quarterbacks and set up the ideal draft for the New Orleans Saints. A new 7-round mock draft and some top 30 visits you need to know about. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Thursday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And I want to kick off today's episode with a look at how the New Orleans Saints' recent move with the Philadelphia Eagles could force the hand of some NFC South rivals that are hungry for quarterbacks and set up the ideal draft situation for the Saints without them even having to move. And it goes beyond, I always promise you a little bit of lagniappe, it goes beyond the NFC South rivals, but let's start with both of them. Now that the Saints have both picks 16 and 19 in the first round after their trade with the Philadelphia Eagles, a lot of experts believe that the Saints now have the fodder to move up as far as the top 3 in this year's NFL draft. It's one of the reasons why a lot of those same experts continue to talk about the Saints being interested in a quarterback and that they wouldn't make this move otherwise. Now, if you've heard any of the last few episodes this week, you know that I disagree with that. I don't think that the Saints are necessarily looking to make another move up to quarterback. They can if the opportunity were to present itself and it makes sense, but I think the Saints should take 16 and 19 and invest them in some quality starters at other positions on the offensive side, like tackle and wide receiver. But having 16 and 19 and having the ability to be able to move up into the top 5, into the top 10, puts a little bit of stress on teams like the Carolina Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons, who may be looking to invest at quarterback this offseason. Imagine being the Carolina Panthers and having the New Orleans Saints trade up to, let's say, 5 with the the New York Giants, and jumping both you and the Atlanta Falcons in order to go up and select Malik Willis, right? If you're the Carolina Panthers, you have to be nervous about that because the Saints could be in that quarterback market. And we've seen this time and time again in previous drafts to where a team that selects at, let's say, 4 or 5 moves up one spot to 4 or 3 just to fend off another team from being able to jump them because the other team that they're trading with can get better quality, moving only 1 pick back as opposed to 10 to 15 picks back, right? So for the Saints, who have the ability to move into the top 5, maybe even the top 3 with the Houston Texans, who are going to look to gather as many assets as possible and would love 2 first-round picks this year instead of drafting at 3, the Carolina Panthers could see the Saints as a potential threat to leap them for a guy that they might be interested in, like Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis, and themselves trade into the top 3 or top 5 in order to keep the Saints or any other quarterback needy team from doing that. If they do that, then the Falcons maybe find that same heat and move themselves up from 8 to, let's say, 7, or from 8 to 5 if Carolina moves up to, let's say, 3. So because of that, you end up putting a lot of pressure on these NFC South rivals who need quarterbacks. And really the only 2 teams that don't have a bona fide starter at quarterback, with Sam Darnold being the Carolina Panthers option and with Marcus Mariota being the Atlanta Falcons option, you put that kind of pressure on them and it might cause them to make some ill-advised decisions to keep you, the threat within the division, from moving up to take a quarterback. A little bit of mind game here, right? And that's part of why the NFL draft is so entertaining and why it's so unexpected. Because we might look at this draft class, and you've heard a lot of those sort of narratives around, and one that I've repeated myself, there's not necessarily a first-round quarterback in this year's draft. That's what media says. That's what we say. That's what the analysts say. But what do the coaches say? The coaches fall in love with quarterbacks really, really quickly. Matt Rule could be a guy who has already been connected to Kenny Pickett because he recruited him like crazy to go to Temple, who might see the Saints as a threat, and want to move up to make sure and ensure that they get their guy in their selection, their pick of the litter at the quarterback spot. And it doesn't stop at the NFC South teams. You also have yourself, the New Orleans Saints, strategically positioned at pick 19, one pick ahead of another team that has very much been invested in this year's rookie quarterback class, and that is at 20, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So even if the Saints sit where they are at 16, they present a threat at 19 to the Pittsburgh Steelers for another quarterback like maybe Sam Howell or potentially Kenny Pickett if he falls far enough, or even Desmond Ridder, or some type of inexplicable tumble for Malik Willis. So you could see the Pittsburgh Steelers look to trade up from 20 to, let's say, 12 with the Minnesota Vikings, who have already reportedly been in contact with the Los Angeles Chargers, who pick at 17. So not so far that the Pittsburgh Steelers wouldn't be able to up that offer to make sure that they get their quarterback that they like and get ahead of the New Orleans Saints at both 16 and 19, or even may look to trade again with the Philadelphia Eagles, who may continue to want to play this moving game. They did it last time, right? They jumped up to 8, then they jumped up to 2 to make sure that they got Carson Wentz, and they continue to make last year all those moves around that allowed the San Francisco 49ers to draft Trey Lance, right? So you could see maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers reaching out to the Philadelphia Eagles at 18 and saying, hey, let me get up there so I can get ahead of this problem that you caused me with the with this trade with the New Orleans Saints, so that I can get my quarterback, whether that be Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell, Matt Corral, whatever. And then that leaves with 2 quarterbacks going in the top 10, Derek Stingley testing well enough and proving that he is pretty healthy at this point. He potentially moves himself into the top 15. Kyle Hamilton should be in the top 15. Sauce Gardner will be in the top 15. If all 5 of those players end up populating the top 15, that's pushing tackles and that's pushing wide receivers all the way down the list to the Saints sitting pretty at 16. And who could see the Los Angeles Chargers potentially jump them? We've seen the Saints get jumped in the draft before with the Minnesota Vikings, but if they put enough pressure on the Pittsburgh Steelers in that quarterback conversation, the Steelers might be the ones to jump up to that spot, which leaves the Saints sitting pretty at 16 with any option that they want. Again, the New Orleans Saints have all options available to them, and now they're putting a lot of pressure on teams around them that are looking for quarterbacks because they have those 2 first-rounders right in the middle that allow them to move up pretty much as far as they want to move up, maybe even move back as far as they want to move back. But because of their threat to move up, they present and put a lot of pressure on those other quarterback-needy teams, which could work in their benefit, making more of those quarterbacks fly off the board early, dropping some of the positions that the Saints might really be interested in to 16, 19, or a more manageable trade distance if they want to take a smaller leap to grab the guy that they absolutely want. So that sets up the New Orleans Saints for the ideal scenario around their perfect draft. Now let's talk about what the perfect draft looks like. The ideal New Orleans Saints draft, in my eyes, starts with tackle, rounds out again with wide receiver, and of course we double dip at wide receiver because you need to add some firepower to this offense, and we're going to do that for them as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that 7-round mock draft, I want to tell you about our friends over at betonline.net, the #1 place for all the information that you need on sports wagering and sports betting. There's just simply absolutely no better place to go for everything that you need in that department than betonline.net, your #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find the latest in terms of sports developments, as well as including this weekend's Masters Championship. You saw them skipping golf balls across the lake, which is exactly what I would waste all my time doing. If somebody bought me golf lessons, I wouldn't be trying to play golf. I'd be trying to skip golf balls across lakes. I'm weird like that. But anyway, you can find that podcast, reviews for all the different leagues all throughout this season. Your continued source, trusted source for everything that you need around sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and much more as well. So head over to the website today or use the mobile device so that you can catch up on all of the trends and action over at betonline.net, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out that Locked On NFL YouTube page where I explained to Luke Braun on Tuesday why it is that I don't think the New Orleans Saints are really that keen on going quarterback, but there might be a quarterback in the later rounds that they like. And that's close to where we get here when it comes to this mock draft. I wanted to set us up so that we end up picking up our ideal version of the New Orleans Saints draft. So I took control of the Carolina Panthers, took control of the Atlanta Falcons, I took control of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and had them all trade up for quarterbacks to see what fell at 16 and 19 without having to move at all. And y'all, I am pleased. I am pleased. Top 50 picks I wanted to be able to dedicate to tackle, wide receiver, and safety in that order, and I was absolutely able to do that. And then behind them, I was able to add more and more firepower to this offense while still addressing a couple of needs on defense. So I started off at pick 16, didn't have to move at all. Northern Iowa tackle Trevor Penning sitting right there. Now, I've had a couple of questions. Why would the New Orleans Saints go after a tackle? Well, they like James Hurst at tackle, but you know what else James Hurst can do? He can play at guard. What if I told you that there's a chance that if you find the right tackle here, that a guy like James Hurst could move inside and maybe push Cesar Ruiz to either further develop or get out of the way, right? And so if you get a guy like Trevor Penning, who you know can be a starter and a longtime staple, a plug-and-play type like Ryan Ramczyk or a plug-and-play type like Eric McCoy that can come in and have an immediate impact for you over on the left side, then you can generate some competition on the interior. You could even draft interior later if you wanted to try to push to help Cesar Ruiz develop, especially with Doug Marrone in the building. So I'm not mad at it. And I love it at 16. And I think the New Orleans Saints specifically positioned themselves in front of the Los Angeles Chargers at 17 with the Saints at 16 so that they didn't have to try to trade up on draft day to get ahead for a tackle. Now the Los Angeles Chargers have to do that. But I created so much turmoil by having these two mid-round, first-round picks that could get me into the top 5, top 3, that all of the trades went to the teams that were looking for quarterbacks who were willing to pay a king's ransom to get there instead. So Trevor Penning falls right in my lap at 16. Okay, at 19, I had to go nowhere. Wide receiver Chris Olave out of Ohio State. This one's easy for me. He is my top receiver in this class, as much as I love Treylon Burks, who actually fits the prototype of the New Orleans Saints much better. Treylon Burks does. Treylon Burks, as well as Alex Pierce, as well as Christian Watson and Drake London. Those guys all fit the mold of the New Orleans Saints receiver in terms of height, weight, speed. Potentially, we'll see Drake London's personal pro day on April 15th. Might fall in love with him depending upon his 40 time. We'll see, and a lot of folks might fall in love with him depending on his 40 time. But I grabbed a proven commodity here that was part of a absolutely remarkable wide receiver trio and still showed out in 2021 in his college season. So I go with Chris Olave, who gives me somebody that can operate in the slot, that can operate outside, that doesn't round off routes, that doesn't get lazy, that's got good hands, that has really, really good bursts off of the line of scrimmage. You have to worry about him getting pressed a little bit, but one of the reasons why I like drafting him here is because you're not putting him on the line of scrimmage. You're putting him at a flanker role. He's a couple steps off the line of scrimmage, which makes it much harder for a DB to press him because he automatically has separation at the line of scrimmage. Then he can turn that with his long speed, either by crossing over the middle of the field or going up the sideline, attacking the perimeter. It would being able to create and distance and extend that separation with his long speed. So I go with Chris Olave there at pick 19. So 16, 19, I get my tackle, I get my wide receiver. I'm doing Gucci so far. Now, round 2, pick 49 rounds around, and who is sitting there but Jalen Petrie, or Petrie? I'm not really actually sure how to pronounce his last name, but he's coming to Louisiana in this simulation, so it's Petrie today. So out of Baylor, very versatile safety who can play in the box, who can play, dime linebacker, who can play strong safety, who can play in the slot, who can play box, who can play free safety. The guy could do a little bit of everything. He's an absolute playmaker, incredibly athletic, as well as is the rest of that Baylor secondary. So I go ahead and dip into that to bring Jalen Petrie. Now, if you get Tyrann Mathieu, then you maybe don't have to make this selection, right? You can wait a little bit later and go for maybe Baylor teammate JT Woods if you want another developmental safety or something like that. And maybe you can invest in, a quarterback in round 2, potentially, like if a Matt Corral falls or a Sam Howell falls or whatever. I don't know if they will, but a Carson Strong or something like that. Like if you really wanted to invest in a quarterback, you can do it in round 2 in this situation here. But I went with the safety, assuming that the Saints don't sign Tyrann Mathieu. Okay. Pick number 98 in round 3, tight end Greg Dulcich of UCLA. I want somebody that can just step into the role that's available when it comes to the Saints tight end room, which is somebody that can attack the seams and somebody that can be a pass catcher, somebody that can threaten and stretch out those defenses. That's exactly what I want. That's exactly what Dulcich gives you. He's an easy fit. He's one of my favorite tight ends in this class. And then I follow that up with one of my favorite running backs in this class, South Carolina running back Sakadrae White, who again does a ton. He can catch out the backfield. He can run. He can run routes from the from the perimeter. He can line up at slot receiver. He can line up on the outside. You can run inside and outside or wide zones with him. You can run all those concepts, and he's a very good pass protector, built pretty stout as well. 5'11", 6 foot, somewhere around there, 215 pounds, built just like Dameon Pierce, basically, but maybe, just a little bit like stockier in a way. But not as stocky as Dameon Pierce, and he gives you a little bit more agility. So I really like Zacondre White, being able to add him to the mix, especially with Alvin Kamara potentially being suspended at the beginning of the season, up to 6 games. We'll see exactly what happens following that Las Vegas altercation during Pro Bowl week. And even still, you want more talent in this running back room, and you can get it here in the 4th round. Okay, in the 5th round, I went and wanted to address another spot on the defense. I went with defensive interior lineman here. Tito Ogbonnia, one of my favorites. I love these UCLA defensive linemen because they rotate them a ton, but they also use them in a bunch of different spaces, all the way out to 5 tech, all the way into nose tackle, 0 tech, 1 tech, all of that. So I like his versatility. I like the fact that he's used to playing in a rotation as well. Has some really killer pass rushing moves that I like on the interior also. And then I'm able to wrap it all up. Round 6, pick number 194. I promised you we were going to double dip at wide receiver, so I go with Bo Melton out of Rutgers, who just gives you a playmaker with the ball in his hand. That was one of the things that I wanted. I had a shot at Wan'Dale Robinson earlier on in the draft, but I went with Greg Dulcich over him in the 3rd round. I'm not really sure Wan'Dale Robinson makes it all the way to the third round anyway, but Bo Melton kind of gives you all that as well. He's a gadget guy. He can be a special teams guy for you. He's somebody you can get the ball in his hand and you let him go to work and then see if it works, right? And you're investing a late 6th round pick on him. If it doesn't work out, it's fine. If it does work out, you look like a genius. And the Saints have been able to do that before. They could also go, interior offensive line late here in the draft, stuff like that. Guy like Cade Mays, who plays a bunch of different positions. There are a couple different ways they can go here, but I wanted to double dip at wide receiver in order to complete my ideal mock draft. So here you go. Trevor Penning at 16. We got Chris Olave at 19. We turn around and got Jalen Petre at 49. Greg Dulcich, the tight end of the UCLA at 98. Zacondre White out of South Carolina, the running back at 120. 161 with the defensive interior, and address that with Tito Ogbonnia, give you another starter next to David Onyemata, who can also get into that rotation, and then doubled up at wide receiver at 194 with Bo Melton. I like what we did here. Let me know. Let me know if you like it. And also, of course, send me your mock drafts. The Saints have a ton of fun in the mock draft game now because we get to see all of this with 16 and 19. So coming up next, we're going to chat more about some of the other names that could end up on this list because they've been top 30 visits. So what is a top 30 visit in terms of pre-draft visits? Why are they important, and why should you know them? We'll answer all those questions and let you know who the Saints have already had at the facility as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation, wrapping up this Thursday episode of Locked On Saints with a look at top 30 visits, pre-draft visits that you need to know and why they're important. So we're going to break all of them down. We're going to delay our conversation with Luke Braun about the idea of trading up to 12 until hopefully tomorrow's episode, maybe Monday's episode, just working on some scheduling stuff. But this is still really, really useful information for you to understand exactly what you need to know about the pre-draft process and why top 30 visits are important. Now, I should add that top 30 visits do not specifically signify that a team intends to draft a player. So if you get a top 30 visit with a prospect that you like, don't get too excited. If the Saints take a top 30 visit with a prospect that you don't necessarily feel is a good fit, don't get too overwhelmed, because sometimes these top 30 visits are for prospects that they absolutely love. Other times they have used, we've seen the New Orleans Saints do this before. I think Noah Spence was an example of this. They brought him in for a top 30 visit because they had the feeling that he might end up on a rival team within the division, and it gives them an opportunity to get a good look at the competition. You get 30 of these visits. This gives you an opportunity to really, really get a look at the players that you want to get a look at for a variety of reasons. Sometimes you want to look at them because they might end up on a rival team. Sometimes you want to look at them simply because of the fact that they weren't invited to the combine, or they, didn't have a pro day that you could go to because it conflicted with a, larger school's pro day or something like that. So it gives you an opportunity to get a good look at a player that has good tools and good traits on tape, but you want to see what they look like in person. Sometimes these players work out. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you just want to get a closer look at medicals, right? So there's a lot of different sort of versions of all of that work within the 6 top 30 visits that the Saints have already had. So I'm going to try to kind of speculate a little bit about what I think these all fall under in terms of where there's genuine interest versus where there's maybe a look at these players because they might end up on another team. So let's start with looking at the players that might end up on like a rival roster. There's two here. Andrew Booth Jr., the cornerback out of Clemson, and then Skyy Moore, the wide receiver out of Western Michigan. Now, for the New Orleans Saints, they would be wise to be interested in Skyy Moore as well as getting a look at him because he might potentially end up on another team. Skyy Moore is very much a Carolina Panthers, Matt Rule type wide receiver that has really good hands, that is built, with a slight frame, but has enough power and speed to him still and allows that to be a part of his game and can stretch the field a bit, can do some interesting things with the ball in his hand. He fits the Carolina Panthers mold at wide receiver a little bit better than maybe a Terrace Marshall out of LSU did when they selected him last year, for instance. And of course, any wide receiver that the Saints are looking at, they should be considering the fact that they might potentially end up on the Atlanta Falcons because the Atlanta Falcons ain't got no wide receivers on their team. They ain't got a single wide receiver on their team. They couldn't even sign Traquan Smith. So Traquan Smith came home. So when you look at the wide receivers as a whole, there are 3 of the 6 top 30 visits so far have all gone to wide receivers. Skyy Moore out of Western Michigan, Jameson Williams out of Alabama, and then, of course, Arkansas's Treylon Burks. So Moore and cornerback Andrew Booth out of Clemson feel like players that maybe the Saints are getting a look at because they could end up on rival teams. The Atlanta Falcons still have some question marks on their defense. Let me rephrase that. The Atlanta Falcons have a ton of question marks on their defense, including cornerback. Andrew Booth Jr. could be somebody that they invest in the first round. Same thing for, the Carolina Panthers, who could still be looking to get somebody to go across from J.C. Horn, who unfortunately had his season come to an end early last year, but they also lost Stephon Gilmore over the course of the offseason. And is C.J. Henderson really who you're going to roll with? We don't know. So that makes a lot of sense in terms of the Saints getting a look at those two guys, Skyy Moore, Andrew Booth, for potential rivalry placement. Now, when it comes to a player that they're looking at specifically for medicals, this one makes a ton of sense. Jameson Williams, right? Now, they should be very interested in Jameson Williams as well, but this is a guy that hasn't gotten to work out at the combine, that hasn't gotten to work out in any kind of pro day, and of course has all the medical questions that only NFL teams will get the answers to. This is a big part of draft evaluation that I think we often forget in media. In media, sometimes we tend to just try to be as right as possible, but we also kind of have to be as realistic as possible. One of the most important pieces of the draft process, we don't even get a chance to see. And one big piece of that is the medicals, right? We don't get to see the medicals. That's why you end up seeing some players tumble, like Eric McCoy ended up tumbling. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah last year ended up tumbling into the second round because of medicals. We didn't know that until after he was drafted. Ryan Ramczyk tumbled in the first round, and the Saints invested in him despite his injury concerns. They were the only ones that had his medicals, right? So not that they were the only NFL team that had their medicals, but we certainly didn't. So this is a big piece here, is that the Saints get an opportunity to start looking at those kinds of things. Now, Jameson Williams very likely didn't work out with the Saints, but there are still things that you can get a look at just by having him there in person. Treylon Burks, I think the Saints are interested in. He fits the mold, right? 6'3", 225 pounds, 4.55 speed. He's a field stretcher, but he can also win 50-50 situations. He can also produce after the catch in a variety of ways. I think the Saints are interested in Treylon Burks, and I'm not mad at it at all. And then 2 more players here that are left. Dameon Pierce, the running back out of Florida, and Eric Johnson, the defensive lineman out of, Western Missouri? No, Missouri State, sorry. So Eric Johnson is somebody that has an interesting build, has an interesting athletic profile, but didn't get a combine invite. So he didn't get the opportunity to really put anything on display. So it's very likely, although we don't know for sure, but it's likely that Eric Johnson is somebody that actually also worked out for the Saints while he was there on that top 30 visit. Now, he's actually got a lot of top 30 visits, despite the fact that he didn't have a combine and he didn't really get an opportunity to show what he could do over the course of the traditional pre-draft process. That's why these top 30 visits, which have been gone over the course of the last couple of years, remember that, are so important, because you get an opportunity to answer some of those questions that would otherwise be answered by seeing these workouts. You get to work with them, all of that. And you simply just get to see their personality in the building, right? And you have your off-season programs are going on. You're in phase 1. You've got 4 hours of strength and weight training, which, by the way, Saints players are raving about. Traquan Smith telling us during media availability earlier on Wednesday how much different things are with Matt Rhea and their ability to kind of be able to key in and hone in on different things for their workouts, all that. CJ Gardner-Johnson taking to Twitter, tweeting about how great he is and how he just had one of the best lifts of his life, all that. So really, really cool stuff coming out of all that. But while all that's going on, Eric Johnson is walking through, getting to know, getting to see people, getting to shake hands, getting to say hi, and you sort of get to see how he fits into the culture as well. And then running back Dameon Pierce, I think is a player that the Saints could and should be interested in, but every running back in this draft could be a possibility for the Atlanta Falcons as well. So there's a little bit of duality there, right? Let's get a look at him because the Saints could use some help at running back in the preparation of potentially losing Alvin Kamara, but also in trying to increase your depth at that position because you've lost a bunch of it and you don't really have reliable depth behind Mark Ingram right now. And so you can go into the draft with somebody that you really like that's a very good pass protector like Dameon Pierce, right? Somebody that serves multiple roles. But then you also get a look at him because he should be somebody that the Atlanta Falcons are keying in on because every every running back should be in play for them. So there you go. Those are the 6 top 30 visits so far for the New Orleans Saints. Me speculating sort of what categories they fall under, but something you should be very, very excited about is the fact they got 6 out of 30 so far, and half of those are wide receivers. That's a pretty good sign. Now, they had a quarterback scheduled, but that reportedly got canceled, so that's a whole thing. That was Matt Corral. So something to keep an eye out on for maybe later on when it comes to the top 30 visits. But Jameson Williams, Treylon Burks, Skyy Moore, Andrew Booth Jr., Eric Johnson, Dameon Pierce, all top 30 visits for the New Orleans Saints. Okay, coming up tomorrow, I'm really, really excited. I want to say who we're going to have, but y'all know how it goes. If I say the person that's coming on the podcast, then sometimes things go wrong. We saw it happen with Luke Braun. I mentioned him. We weren't able to get it done. So I'm not going to say who it is, but just know I'm hoping that on Friday's episode, I'm going to have a great national personality here that I absolutely love coming through to talk a little bit about what they think the New Orleans Saints are going to do. So you don't want to miss it, right? Because all in all, it's about what the New Orleans Saints are going to do at 16 and 19. And honestly, there are so many different ways they can go. We're going to continue to talk about it all the way to the NFL draft. So make sure you're tuning in for another episode of Locked On Saints tomorrow on Friday. As always, I appreciate you so much for making me a part of your day and making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day as well. For your second listen today, make sure you go and check out that Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Go hear what Eric and Ryan, Eric Crocker, Ryan Tracy, as well as John Harris all had to say about the New Orleans Saints at 16 and 19 and who they might take at those positions as well. So you can go and check that out wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Thanks as always again for making me a part of your day. Don't forget, for everything you need around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, you can follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.